This is Jason Banker from LumosConsulting. Welcome back to our ACI initial build. Today we'll be talking about part 2 of our video series called Fabric Discovery. If you watched our video on APIC configuration, we left off being able to log into the APIC after the APIC was discovered and configured, and now we want to go ahead and build our ACI fabric. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to go into the fabric that we created in the last video. So let's go ahead and log in. What we're going to do is go ahead and discover our spines and leaves. If you remember off the last video, we talked about the APIC being plugged into a pair of switches, right? Those two switches are what we're going to have to discover first via LLDP. Once we discover those switches and assign some VTEP addressing, we are going to be able to find the rest of our environment. So typically you'll find one leaf, and then after that you'll get an influx of equipment no matter how much you have in your environment. But we do have to discover the first leaf first. So we're going to come into Fabric. Right, very popular window when using ACI and being an ACI administrator. Right, we have our inventory tab. Typically any spines and leaves that we have in our pods will show up under these. We only have one pod right now. If I click on it, there's nothing discovered yet, right? So this is normal. There's nothing under pod 1. So what we want to do is come under pod fabric membership while we wait this simulator to catch up. We definitely want to go in. We want to have our naming standard already ready to rock. It's even helpful if we have our initial BOM where we ordered equipment that has a list of serial numbers. I'll show you why. So here we have registered nodes. There are cases we'll be working with a client who has 30 leafs, but maybe they only have 10 on site. What we can do here is we can come in and create a fabric node member. We can give it what pod it's part of, what the serial number is based off the BOM, what node ID we want to give it, and what's the name of the switch. And what this allows us to do is pre-populate some values when the gear does arrive. The customer can rack and stack and plug and play with cables, and we'll discover the leafs, and they'll be part of the fabric. Again, most of the time equipment is there. We do not have to do this. But I guess let me point out that your serial numbers are huge. So when you're naming your infrastructure and you're choosing what spines and what's leaf, verify the serial number with the naming you're doing. What you don't want is to think node 101 is in rack 1, but when really it's node 103. So in order to start discovering, we want to go to nodes pending registration. Something you can look at up top real quick. It'll tell you if there's a new switch ready to go. There is. So you want to go nodes pending registration. As you can see, we have something available. Because this is a sim, there's not a real serial number here, but this is where you would see your serial number. Again, what rack does it live in? Verify it's what you think it is, right? And then we're going to want to right click and hit register. In our case, we want to go with our standard that I talked about in the last video. Since this is pod 1, all of our leafs are going to be from 101 to 199. Right, this tells us it's a leaf and it's in pod 1. Right, so be consistent. I recommend you really plan this out. Node name, keep it very simple. Every customer has their own naming standard, understood. The only recommendation we have strongly is that the node ID is in that name. We would also recommend keep the name as simple as possible. We like leaf 101 or L101 if possible. Understand that that's not always feasible. But it definitely helps with naming standard and keeping it simple within ACI. ACI is great, has a lot of configuration values and can be very complex. It's also bad because it can be very complex and people sometimes go overboard. So just think about what you're naming things. The node name can change later. The node ID cannot. So again, be consistent. Is your serial number the node you think it is? So we're going to go ahead and register. As we're registering, we can talk. You're going to see the status go from a status unknown to a discovering and then active. Once it's active, it will no longer show up here. It will now be under registered nodes, and then we will see pod 1 populate with the leaf, and then we will go through the process for the next set of leaves. So the only time you have to go through this is when you are bringing up your fabric from the start, or you're adding a pair of leaves as you go later. As we could see, the nodes just left. We can go to registered nodes now. We see it here. It's going to give us our model, pod ID, right? What we really want to verify, are we receiving our VTEP addressing from our APIC, right? Once this status goes active, we will see it in pod 1. Something to note here, this IP is out of our 10.0.0.0/16 range. We have no control of what IP it's given. As you can see, the third octet's 144. I had no control over that. The fourth is 64. It is something done internally. What is consistent is that your APICs 1, 2, and 3 will be 10.0.0.1, 2, and 3, right? But again, we have no control over this. Be patient. It's not really necessary for us to control this. I know as network guys, we like to control some of these parameters, which in this case we can't, so be patient. But again, just became active. We do now see it over here. We will see another piece of our environment populate here once it gets discovered. What I can show you here is that now we can open up the leaves. This is where you will go in and do what you typically do, a show interface command. I can come into the interfaces. I can look at physical interfaces. I can look at ports, which ports are the QSFP ports. If it says fabric, that's going to my spines. Here is all other downlink ports, host ports, right? It's going to tell me link up and down. You will be in and out of this quite a bit. Very typical screen to go to. You can look at routing tables. You can look at different things from the Leafs perspective. Again, you will be in and out of this. So we'll go back to Fabric membership. We'll see if we have another node pending registration. We do. I can verify via its role. It is a spine. So based on our Visio we had, we're going to go ahead and name this guy node 911. We keep the spines in a higher node range because it allows us to know their spines. 911 and 912 is what we'd use here. In pod 2, we use 921 and 922. Pod 3, 933, 31 and 32. Again, it helps us understand what device is what when we're looking at something, right? So we can go ahead and give it a known name, keep it very simple. Call in that spine 911. We can register this. We can take a peek at it. It's going to disappear. It will go into registered nodes. So we can come into registered nodes and wait for it. While we're waiting, I can go ahead and, in some instances, hey, you have a bad switch. It has to be RMA'd. What we can do is come in here. We can decommission the switch, or we can go ahead and remove it from controller. Typically, if we had to RMA a switch and the new switch arrived, we would come in here and remove this from the controller. We would unplug the spine ports. We would remove the switch, we would land the new switch, and the new switch would now replace node 101, and we'd give that node 101. And what that will do is allow all the policies that was on the last 101 to be on the new one, right? So again, it's just plug and play for us as long as we take the correct steps. We can see spine 911 has shown up in our environment. It did receive a VTEP address, right? Good. We just want it to see active. We want it to show in our pod. And we will be able to discover our third leaf, our second leaf. Well, here it is, it already showed. So now we have the next leaf is leaf 2. So we can come ahead, 102. Just keep it simple, leaf dash 102. All right, we'll register this. We'll come into registered nodes. We can now see our spine is active. Sometimes we see in the simulator one of the leaves will go inactive, and I'll show you how to make that active or commission it. Right, it's a simulator thing, but it is good to know. So we did see the second leaf join. Again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but make sure your serial numbers match what node you think it is and it lands in your right rack in your environment. Because what we will do is we will pair within VPC these two nodes, and we need to know they're correct. So let's go ahead and let this become active. So in a typical simulating environment, you're going to have one spine, two leaves, one APIC. Again, your environment might have 40 leaves. You're going to have to do this 40 times, but once it's done, it's done, and you don't have to go back through it. Again, it's part of the design process. Again, this is a simulator thing. This is inactive. It does give you an example of how to commission something. So I can say commission, right? And what that's going to do is it's asking me, do I want this to become part of my fabric, right? You can also see that the VTEP address did receive was .66. So we'll go ahead, wait for this to become active. While we're waiting, if you see this Topology tab over here on the sub-navigation field, I can go ahead and hit Topology. It might take a minute to load. All right, 102 just became active. We were known. You should see it showing up on the field here. We can go to Topology. This is always handy just to kind of see what you're on, how it looks. You do have to sometimes play with this. In this case, we're only connected to Leaf 101, but this is what our environment looks like. Is helpful. Does show us what the environment looks like. So the last step here after discovering these leaves is we do want to make them paired in a VPC format, right? So again, we want them to be Leaf 101 and 102, right? 103 and 104, 105 and 106, so on and so forth. We will do that in our interface profile section video that's coming. What I do want to focus on right now is, because we have an environment, we do want to provide OOB addressing. So in order to do that, we have to go into our tenants. We'll talk about tenants in a much greater detail later, but you will always have 3 tenants available to you: common, management, and infra. Infra, never play with unless specifically told to. It's a word of advice. Our management handles management. So this is where you do in-band and out-of-band, but day one, we want to go ahead and assign some out-of-band addresses to our spines and leaves. So we can come into our management tenant, come into our node management addresses, right? In our static node management addresses, we can say, hey, we want to start at a certain range. So I can say from node range 101, I could, if I just want to do one leaf, I could do 101 to 101. Or I could do 101 to 110, for example, right? I'm going to say out of band addresses. We're going to go to default EPG, right? And we're going to go ahead and give it a range, right? So I'm going to stick within the same range we've been using. I'm going to start at 100. Actually, we'll start at 101, say /24. And what it's going to do is all the leaves in a row, it's going to assign a value, right? So in a production environment, you will see node 101 receive IP 101 all the way through 110. This is very handy, so I know if I know my out-of-band range, I know 101 is leaf 101, right? Very handy. 1030 44 1. We can go ahead and hit submit here. That's just going to give me a warning. All right, as you can see, leaf 101 was assigned it, 102 was assigned. Now I want to give a range that makes sense for my spines. In this case, I'm just going to say, we'll say nodes 911 to 912. You are going to be a part of 1030 44 91 /24. Alright, we should see our spine 1 was given, spine 911 was given 1030 44 91. As long as our OOB connections are in place, we are now able to do a lot of things out of the OOB addressing. We'll be talking about in the next video pod policy, but within pod policy we assign NTP, DNS, SNMP, management protocols, things of that nature, which happens inherently default out of the box using OOB. Again, can it be changed? Yes, but you do need this day one. So this is extremely critical. Rack, stack, cable, know what you're getting into. But thanks for joining. If you have any comments, have any questions, please put them in the comment field below, and we'll see you next week with the new video, Pod Policy.